Hi, and welcome to the latest installment of the Change Agents Unite video podcast. I'm Justin Ewan, founder of FMYI, For My Innovation, and today I'm joined by Darcy Winslow, founder of the DSW Collective, Designs for Sustainable World.
Perfect.
And Darcy was one of the folks that really inspired me on my sustainability journey, and today I really wanted to focus in on sustainability and change. And to start off with, in terms of your background, what are some of the major things that contributed to you becoming a sustainability change agent?
Well, I started at Nike really from a science background in the sport research lab doing biomechanical research. So if you look at it from a traditional perspective, nothing prepared me for my work in sustainability. But over time at Nike, working in different parts of the organization, I really started looking at deeper questions, underlying questions around what we were doing, the impact that those actions had on the environment, and really learning from other change agents, Bill Mcdonough, Peter Senge, Janine Benyus. They were such an inspiration to me. And it really taught me to start to look at things more systemically and longitudinally, especially when I was working in advanced research and development. And there, our work was really focused on technologies or processes or products that wouldn't play out in our product line for 2 to 10 years. And so we really had to look deeper at what our impact was. And that led me, honestly, to be dissatisfied with status quo on a larger level.
Right. In terms of Bill Mcdonough, tell me more about how he inspired you on the journey.
Sure. Well, first Bill designed our European headquarters, and it was really the first time green building came into our purview. And then he came to Nike headquarters in April of '97. That's when I met him, and he flipped my world. And about 4 years later, he and his business partner, Michael Brongard, who owned Mcdonough Brongard Design Chemistry, asked 10 business leaders to join them for a week fly fishing in Iceland. And so I was one of the lucky ones, and actually I was the only female. So it was 10 of us and then 5 Icelandic fly fishing guides up there for a week, again, just to create the space for deep dialogue around what was possible. And one day, Michael Brongard and I were fly fishing partners, and we had this one beat of the river, and neither Michael or I could fly fish, to save our life. But we were having this great conversation, and we started talking about how to bring very disparate companies together around a common issue. And by the time we stepped out of the water that day, we had come up with the concept of materials pooling. And we had someone there from Ford, and someone from Herman Miller, the furniture company, and me from Nike. And that night, we started talking, what do we have in common? Leather. And so we talked about how we could create a small coalition to start to work with the leather industry to design chromium out of the process. And so I think that was one of the early efforts around, collaborating beyond your borders and across industry to make a difference in the world. And to, it all came down to power and size. And so the 3 companies together, we could really make a difference.
And that's one of the beautiful things about sustainability, I think, is it brings together sometimes competitors, but also just in general other businesses and to work together to find solutions. And right now, you've seen it evolve towards all these notions of crowdsourcing or open source and things like that. So I think it gives me great optimism as well.
Yeah.
And I think that you have this unique background of understanding how the process of initiatives work, and also systemically how culture works. And I know a lot of folks have been interested in coming to our Change Agents Unite website to learn about tips or techniques to become a change agent themselves. And so what can you offer them in terms of the process of creating change within their own team?
Well, I think the first step is to look inward and to understand, make sure you really understand at a deep level what your own personal intentions are and the source, the space from which you come at that change. because I think too often we place ourselves outside of that system and it becomes very mechanistic, so it's got to be personal. And so what is your intention around that change? Once you get there, I think having the ability to help visualize and envision what that new reality is, and to help people get there by engaging them to help create a shared vision, not coming in with your vision solely, but creating a shared vision. And in order to do so, you've got to create the space for that dialogue and that reflection to happen.
I know personally for me, one of the reasons why sustainability is attractive is the design aspects, the innovation aspects. For you in sustainability, what has attracted your passion around that topic?
Wow, that's a big one. Early on in footwear at Nike, when we started looking at what our impact was, it was pretty simple. It was around how much waste we were creating. And it all came back to design, and also back to what Bill Mcdonough once said at Nike, and continues to say that design is the first signal of human intention. So what is it we're creating? How are we creating that? And that really led us to look at what the impact was at Nike. And just going back to a cultural aspect of this work, when we first started working, the small team at Nike on this, I think we came at it from the perspective of how do we care for the world? How do we care for the earth? How do we care for the environment and the people? And it was very incongruent with the culture at Nike, especially back then when sustainability wasn't well understood. And it wasn't until we took that information and triangulated into how much, from a dollar perspective, we were actually creating in waste. That woke people up. And, it's another, I think, lesson for change agents. Understand vocabulary and the language that the organization will hear.
And having that shared vision about the economic value of waste, or having that vision of going through the Shambhala program that Nike put together, and saying, well, what does a fully sustainable Nike look like in 2020? I think valuable. Then you get down to how do you operationalize or internalize that vision. And so for you, what kind of impact can culture change have towards reaching sustainable goals? How do you leverage culture change for sustainability means?
Well, I would push back and say it's not about culture change. I think it's about understanding culture, the culture within which you're operating, and how you use that as a lever for the change that needs to happen. Because especially for an organization that has a really deep-seated culture, you're not going to change it. I mean, it is hardwired back to the founders. So understanding at a very deep level what those artifacts are within a culture that will affect people's behavior, and that will then cause them to act in one way or another. And too often we look at, I believe it's very important that you create that North Star, that really aggressive vision for what you want to create. Not problems you want to solve, but what you actually want to create. And then, build the strategy, ensure that the organization is structured so that it will support that strategy. And then, get your people lined up, your operations, everything in alignment, and then make sure that you understand the culture. And too often that is left, just to the side. It's so amorphous, but it's so powerful in terms of, is it a lever or a barrier for change?
Right. And so often change, the word itself, is scary to folks, and really the message is adapting to the existing culture, but providing them potentially a new goal that embraces it to work together as a team.
Right, and I think reframing it to that creative orientation, because if you look at change, it often requires people to let go of what they've helped create. And, there's a control factor there. There's an ego factor there. And the reality is, what got us to, what got us here today is not going to get us to the right place tomorrow. The sense of urgency and the sense of possibility, helping create that sense of possibility to let people really kind of make space for something new. but too often we have to hold on to what we know because that's what we know. That's what we can control. And we're moving into unknown waters.
And I know we've talked about just recently about the type of leadership that's needed to help usher in the change or innovation or help folks reach this North Star. How can people grow into becoming those leaders, or how can organizations adapt to embracing that new type of leadership?
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap between not leading and strategy, but leading for sustainability. There's a huge gap there. There's a gap in fluency of what that means. And I think one of the biggest things that we need to focus on is a much, much higher level of collaboration. Certainly within the organization itself, because one person can't own, the change that needs to happen. But collaboration within industries and across industries. So if we look at, really pressing issues, the water system, energy, whatever it might be, we can't solve that on our own. And I think that's a huge barrier for a lot of organizations to, start to open up their borders and invite others who may be in the competitive space to enter into the solution space. So I think that's what's needed, and I do see that happening, but it needs to accelerate.
Right. And a lot of this can be very serious or pretty intense work. The stakes are very high that I think we all feel. But there definitely is a role and importance of having fun or finding inspiration. And I know you've taken some great trips to Antarctica and to Baja for reflection. Tell me a little bit more about some of your own experiences with finding inspiration or reconnecting or having fun in this journey.
Sure. Yeah, somebody asked me once, they said, given all the climate data and, the data that we work with on a daily basis, how do you stay so optimistic? And my answer was, we have choices. We can do nothing and just kind of accept our fate, or we can follow the leader, and take, some steps toward a different future, or you can put everything you've got into creating a new trajectory, and that's what I choose to do. So all of my energy is there, and I do look for points of inspiration. The trips to Antarctica, I'm actually supposed to be there right now, and I was in contact with them yesterday, so Robert Swan and his company 2041, and they were just rounding the Antarctic Peninsula, the Antarctic Sound. And when I was down there last year, it was really interesting because we saw something that we hadn't seen the year before. And it's the Larsen B Ice Shelf, which is a huge ice shelf that broke off in 2002. And these icebergs, they're so large that they actually name them. They're now floating into the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, the Antarctic Sound, which means they'll now be entering open water. And as they hit the convergence line, which is well into the Southern Ocean, that's when the temperature increases dramatically in the water. So you can start to see, things shifting. I mean, it's going to have a radical impact on sea level rise, that and other, geographies around the world. But, they reported back to me that live from the Antarctic Sound, and they've got a new group of leaders. And when we take these expeditions, it's business leaders and it's emerging leaders. And once we get on the ship and on the ice, all egos, all titles, all hierarchy goes away, and we're all having this immersive, transformative experience, and really trying to understand who are we as leaders, and how do we collaborate, and when we get back into the real world, how do we activate our networks? And these are leaders, from 25, 30 countries, so they're pretty powerful.
And somehow the presence of that, the beauty of that nature brings people to a different level of
and
dialogue.
what we stand to lose.
Right.
And the importance that the Antarctic has on global climate.
And so it sounds like a lot of the conversation focuses on the collaborative networks that each person was a part of. Do you have suggestions on ways to pursue collaboration with people, stakeholders, and in terms of how people can connect with one another and how they can work together more effectively?
Yeah, I think what you're asking is how do you convene, the right people? And I think a lot of it comes down to what is the essential critical question that you're posing. And it takes a long time to really crystallize that. Once you do, then what's the invitation to the group? So how do you create the space where, all voices are equal, all voices are in the room, and you're really having the conversation that you need to have. Part of the role of these change makers is to create that space, but also to create the tension. And in that tension, to create that new vision, that shared vision.
And I think the importance so first off, being changing is very important, and I think it speaks to the fact also that we can't do this alone. We need to work together collaboratively in these networks to achieve some of these goals. And as you look into the future and trends, things like that, what opportunities get you most excited about sustainability and change?
Well, just going back to this collaboration and seeing, signs like Green Exchange, the Eco Index, when an entire industry is really getting on board to create the tools and the collaboration needed. That gives me hope. I would also say companies like Unilever and some of their recent commitments and statements to their shareholders, their stakeholders. Don't look for that quarterly or that annual return on investment. We're looking 10, 20, 50 years out. Great. Companies like Patagonia, even though they're privately held, for the founder to stand up and say, we know how big enough is, we don't need to continually grow. So really starting to challenge growth at any cost, or the belief that growth and consumption can happen, indefinitely. No, it can't. So seeing these leaders, business leaders step up and make these statements, and I think that the more airtime we give them, and the more we support companies like that, the faster the uptake will be, because we need to see radical shifts. We're on a bad trajectory right now.
Right. Well, and in terms of folks that are in small organizations, or people thinking about going off and doing their own thing, like you have, and like I have with FMYI, what opportunities do you see for social entrepreneurs or folks trying to be active in the NGO scene, or people just trying to start their own small businesses around some of these opportunities?
I think the opportunities are endless, regardless of the domain. If you're in education, what's happening in K through 12 education, what's happening in higher education, executive development education, radical shifts, from even 10 years ago. To see a movement of systems thinking and sustainability curriculum completely being rewritten into K through 12, that's a huge shift. I mean, we're teaching kids to not be systems thinkers. And so that's starting to reverse itself. I think in economic development, business communities, or the communities at large, what's happening, here in Portland around eco districts, that's radical. Businesses, we talked about that, NGOs. So, pick your place. Again, understand your intentions, your highest intentions of what you want to do, and go out and make a difference.
Well, I know I'm inspired now. So, but Darcy, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. And thank all of you out there for being part of our Change Agents Unite podcast series, and we'll see you next time.